My name is Dr. David Wilson. I am an obstetrician dedicated to guiding women through pregnancy. I first met Carol Taylor at a corporate workshop where I was delivering a speech on women's health. As I stood at the podium, my eyes caught hers. She was seated near the middle, her radiant smile and genuine engagement immediately drawing me in. She had an air about her, elegant yet approachable. After my speech, Carol approached me. She introduced herself as a dance instructor and complimented my talk. What started as polite conversation quickly turned deeper. She shared her love for dance and how it gave her life meaning, and I shared my passion for women's health. By the end of the evening, I was smitten. Carol was beautiful, but it was her spirit that captivated me. She was driven and had an infectious enthusiasm for life. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing more of each other. Each date brought new discoveries. She'd tell me about her parents, her father, Jeff, a former auto engineer, and her mother, Brenda, a retired professor of social studies who inspired her love for learning and expression. Talking about my family was bittersweet. My parents had passed away in a car accident a few years earlier, leaving an irreplaceable void. Sharing this with Carol was hard, but she listened in a way that made me feel understood, not pitied. Her empathy was one of her greatest strengths. We dated for a year, and during that time, I came to know her dreams. One of her deepest aspirations was to open her own dance studio. She had been teaching for years, but longed for a space of her own. It wasn't just about dance. It was about creating a community, a sanctuary for joy and expression. Our wedding was a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family. It was about us and the life we were starting together. I can still remember how stunning Carol looked that day, her joy radiating like sunlight. In that moment, I knew there was nothing I wouldn't do to make her happy. After we married, I thought seriously about her dream. Carol had supported me in every way, and now it was my turn. With careful planning, I took out a loan to help her open her studio. It was a big financial commitment, but I believed in her. Seeing her face light up when I told her was worth every sleepless night calculating the numbers. We found the perfect space, a charming location with large windows and natural light. Carol poured her heart into designing it, from the mirrors lining the walls to the polished wooden floors. When the studio opened, it wasn't just a place for dance. It was a testament to her perseverance and our partnership. The first 2 years of our marriage were great, but the third year went downhill. Carol grew distant, always tired, and avoided being near me. Intimacy diminished, and when it happened, it felt empty, like I was with a stranger. I tried to dismiss it, hoping it was just a phase, but the emotional gap widened. Then one day, she surprised me with a positive pregnancy test. I was stunned but hopeful. I took her to my clinic for further tests, and everything looked promising. It seemed like a healthy pregnancy. For the first time in a while, I felt joy. Finally, I had something to be happy about. Although, I was happy, but something didn't add up. Over dinner, I asked Carol when she found out she was pregnant. She said it had been about a month. I noted her response, but it troubled me. As someone who works with pregnancies every day, I knew something wasn't right. I did not have sex with her in the past month. There was no way she could be pregnant by me. I tried to dismiss the thought, chalking it up to my insecurities, but the unease lingered. A week later, I visited Carol's studio after hours. The place was quiet, the lights off, but as I walked into the office, I felt a chill. The air was cold, unnaturally so, as if the air conditioner had been running just moments ago. Carol was supposed to be at her parents' house. Why was the room still cold? Was someone here? I walked near the table and noticed a few drops of liquid glistening on the floor, just near the edge of the table. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. Someone had been here. That much was clear. I didn't bother examining the liquid. I wasn't ready to face whatever answer it might give me. Instead, I stepped out of the office, pulling the door shut behind me. Once outside, I pulled my phone from my pocket and called James, a friend of mine who's a government contractor. James doesn't just dabble in surveillance. He's one of the best. The guy provides CCTV solutions to the Pentagon. If anyone could help me, it was him. David, James answered after a couple of rings, his voice brisk. What's up? I need a favor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something's off in my studio. I think someone's been in there. I need to find out what's going on. There was a pause on his end. You're not thinking of going full conspiracy theorist on me, are you? He said, but I could hear the concern creeping into his tone. I wouldn't call you if I didn't need this, James, I replied. All right, he said, no further questions. I've got a small cam and mic setup that'll work. They're Wi-Fi enabled, real-time feed. I can swing by in 30. You good with that? Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks. True to his word, James showed up half an hour later. His toolbox in hand, he walked straight past me and into the studio, his usual no-nonsense attitude on full display. He got to work immediately, hiding the tiny camera behind a bookshelf and placing the mic discreetly near the light fixture. As he was finishing up, James straightened and looked at me. "You okay?" he asked, studying me carefully. "Yeah," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Everything fine in your marriage?" he asked casually, but his eyes betrayed something sharper. "Yeah, so far," I replied, though even as I said it, I felt a flicker of uncertainty. He didn't press me further, but his attention shifted to the liquid near the table. Without saying a word, he crouched down, dipped 2 fingers into the small puddle, and brought them to his nose. He sniffed, his brow furrowing. "Huh," he muttered. Then he stood up, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Someone's been having sex in here." My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. James glanced at me, as if waiting for a reaction. When I didn't give him one, he cleared his throat and pointed to the thermostat on the wall. "You found the room cold, and the AC was off, right?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "You found the room cold, and the AC was off, right?" James asked, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face me. "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice steady, though the tension in my chest was building. James exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Well," he said, his tone taking on a harder edge, "let's just wait and see if the culprits come back again." Before I could say anything, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "David," he began, lowering his voice, "what if it's your wife?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. I clenched my jaw, staring at him for a moment before answering. "Well," I said evenly, "she's in for some real hell. I can promise you that." James studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Fair enough," he said. To take my mind off things, we decided to head to our favorite watering hole. A couple of drinks in, James was cracking jokes about some of the bizarre surveillance gigs he'd worked, and for a while it helped. But no matter how much I tried to relax, the weight of what might be happening in my studio stayed with me. A few days later, I got a call that threw me off balance. "David, my father-in-law, Jeff," said as soon as I answered. "Can we meet? There's something I need to talk to you about." Jeff wasn't the type to call out of the blue, much less ask to meet. His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it that put me on edge. "Sure," I said cautiously. "When and where?" "There's a cafe near my house. Let's meet there in an hour." I agreed, though the unease stayed with me as I made my way to the cafe. What could he want? Was it about my wife? Did he know something I didn't? When I arrived, Jeff was already seated at a small table in the corner. He waved me over, and I noticed a thin, worn-out wallet sitting next to his coffee cup. "Hey, Jeff," I said, taking the seat across from him. "David." He greeted me with a nod. His usual cheerful demeanor was missing, replaced by something more serious. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a card, and slid it across the table toward me. I frowned, picking it up. "What's this?" "It's my savings card," he said simply. "Everything I've got is on there." I stared at him, confused. "Why are you giving this to me?" Jeff leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I want you to keep it safe for me," he said, his voice low. "I might need it soon." Jeff stared at me, his eyes heavy with something I hadn't seen before, fear. He leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and then said, "I have cancer, David." The words hit me like a freight train. I blinked, trying to process what he just said. "Cancer?" I repeated, my voice quieter than I intended. "What kind? How bad is it?" "Lung," he said, his tone steady but grim. "The doctors say I'll need chemotherapy. A lot of it." "Jeff," I began, but the words got caught in my throat. "I'm so sorry. But why are you giving me your savings card? Why not give it to Brenda?" His face darkened at the mention of his wife. "I can't trust Brenda," he said flatly. I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Jeff leaned forward, lowering his voice even more. "If Brenda finds out I've saved this money, she'll take it and spend it all," he said. "She has no self-control, David. Shopping is her addiction. Clothes, jewelry, things we don't need. She'll blow through it without a second thought, and when I need it for my treatment..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I stared at him, trying to piece it all together. "So, you've been saving this money? Secretly?" "Yes," he admitted. "I've been setting aside a little at a time, stealing from myself, you could say. Brenda has no idea it even exists. Between her spending habits and what insurance won't cover, this is the only way I'll get through it." I sat back, the weight of his words settling over me. This wasn't just about money. It was about survival. Jeff, you don't have to explain, I said finally. I'll hold on to it for you. You can count on me during your treatment and beyond. His expression softened, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. You're more than a son to me, David, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Your family, Jeff. Always. We both sat there in silence for a moment, the gravity of the situation hanging between us. Finally, Jeff stood, extending a hand toward me. I shook it firmly, and we exchanged a small, somber smile. Thank you, he said. Anytime, I replied. We greeted each other one last time and left the cafe, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Life slowed down over the next month. The days felt routine, almost dull, until one Saturday evening, Carol was once again at her parents' when my phone rang. It was a nearby hospital, calling me in for an emergency operation. Calls like these weren't unusual. Hospitals often reached out for consultations, or, in some cases, when they needed a surgeon for particularly complicated procedures. I quickly grabbed my bag and headed out, my mind already running through potential scenarios. When I arrived, the ER was buzzing with activity. A nurse approached me as soon as I walked in. Dr. David, she said, her tone professional but hurried. We've got a case of partial placenta previa. Placenta previa. My mind shifted gears. This wasn't just a routine consultation. Partial placenta previa meant the placenta had attached itself low in the uterus, partially covering the cervix. It could lead to severe bleeding, complications during delivery, and even risk the mother's life if not handled carefully. I nodded, keeping my voice calm. What's the status? The patient's stable for now, she said, gesturing toward a nearby room. But she's had some bleeding, and her vitals are fluctuating. Is her family here? I asked, moving toward the room. The nurse hesitated. She's accompanied by a man who says he's her husband, she replied, lowering her voice slightly. But I stopped in my tracks and looked at her. But what? She glanced around as if checking to make sure no one else could hear. I don't think he's her husband, she said quietly. I frowned. Why do you say that? Her expression tightened, and she leaned in slightly. Because he doesn't look like a husband, she said. I raised an eyebrow. And what does a husband look like? She sighed, crossing her arms. It's not about looks, Dr. David. It's about how they act. His eyes. They have no concern for the woman or her pregnancy. He's here, but he's distant, detached. Like he's just waiting for it to be over so he can leave. Her words lingered in the air as I processed them. I'd seen plenty of cases over the years. Parents, spouses, and loved ones clinging to hope. Their eyes filled with worry, desperation, or even guilt. This man didn't fit that mold? Interesting, I muttered, glancing toward the room. Let's go see what we're dealing with. I quickly got dressed in my surgical scrubs and stepped into the operating room, the familiar sterile scent of antiseptic filling my nose. As soon as I entered, I saw Carol lying on the operating table, her face twisted in pain. Her breathing was shallow, rapid, and tears streaked down her cheeks. The man beside her was holding her hand, his face unreadable. For a split second, I was frozen. Something about the scene made me pause, a dark thought crossing my mind. Maybe I should just walk away and let her suffer. Let her die. It would be easier, wouldn't it? I didn't know this woman. She was just another patient, another emergency. But then, reality kicked in. I had an obligation, not just to her, but to the unborn child growing inside her. The life of that baby was in my hands, and I couldn't abandon them now. I took a deep breath and pushed the dark thought out of my mind, focusing on the task at hand. I moved toward the nurse, who was standing by the equipment. Get me an amniocentesis needle, I ordered, my voice steady and controlled. She nodded quickly and began preparing the necessary tools. The amniocentesis needle, a long, sharp instrument, was used to extract fluid from the amniotic sac. I needed a sample for a DNA test. Something told me that there was more to this situation than I was being told, and I had to be sure. I sat down near Carol's legs, positioning myself to perform the procedure. As I got into position, I looked at the man beside her, who hadn't moved. He was staring at her with an expression I couldn't quite place. I gestured for him to come closer. He hesitated, but finally stepped forward, his hand still loosely holding hers. I looked him in the eye. How did this happen? I asked, my tone professional but pointed. He blinked, caught off guard by the question. I could see his gaze flicker to Carol, and then back to me. How did what happen? He replied, his voice low and guarded. I raised an eyebrow. He wasn't going to make this easy, was he? How did she end up here? Why is she in this state? I pressed. She is hot and I had some rough sex with her. She started screaming and I had to let go. Man, that was a bummer. He said that and gave out a small chuckle. The nurse returned with the needle, and I briefly looked over the form she handed to the man. She asked, "Are you her husband?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, I am the man," he said, a cold certainty in his voice. "That baby is mine as well. Save them quick. We need to go back home." His words struck me in a way I hadn't expected. The urgency in his tone seemed out of place, like he was only concerned with getting it over with and moving on. There was something unsettling in the way he spoke. Was this really how Carol wanted her man to be? Was this the father of her child? I quickly checked the situation, evaluating Carol's condition. Fortunately, there wasn't anything to be overly concerned about, no immediate risk to her or the baby that required surgery. A sigh of relief escaped me. I took the amniotic fluid sample, just as a precaution, and then stood up. "We need this sample to check the condition of the baby," I said, trying to maintain my composure. The man nodded, but his impatience was palpable, his eyes already darting toward the door. I didn't waste any time. I walked out of the room, leaving them behind. The nurse followed closely behind me, concern written across her face. "Dr. David," she called softly. "Why did you take the fluid?" I paused in the hallway, glancing at her. She wasn't just asking because of the procedure. It was clear she wanted to know what was going through my mind. I met her eyes and gave a small, tight-lipped smile. "That woman is my wife," I said, my voice low enough that only she could hear. "I need to be sure that the child is mine. By the looks of it, that's highly unlikely." She let out a soft, concerned sigh, her gaze shifting away briefly as she processed what I'd said. "I understand," she said, her voice steady. "I'll keep this under wraps. You have my word." Her words hung in the air, a promise to keep quiet about what I had done. I didn't know if I should feel relieved or more unsettled. But for now, I had to trust that I was doing the right thing. I took the sample to the lab, carefully dividing it into 2 parts. One portion I handed over to Linda, the nurse who had been helping me. "Take this to the usual lab," I told her, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm sending the other one to a different lab for a more thorough test. Also, make sure the blood sample gets to the lab with it." Linda nodded, her expression serious. "Got it, Dr. David. I'll handle it." I watched her leave before I took a deep breath. Now, all I had to do was wait 2 weeks for the results. But the waiting wasn't the worst part. My mind kept racing. Carol, the baby, her betrayal. As I left the lab, I couldn't shake the exhaustion weighing down on me. It had been a long day, and my mind was all over the place. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out. It was my father-in-law, Jeff. "David," he said, his voice warm but slightly raspy. "Tomorrow's my 60th birthday. I want you to come. It's important to me." I hesitated for a moment. It felt odd, knowing everything I knew about Carol now, but I couldn't exactly refuse him. Not with everything that had been going on. "I'll be there, Jeff," I said, trying to sound sincere. "I'll make sure to stop by." After I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that seemed to follow me around. Carol hadn't come home that evening, as expected. She sent a message that she'd be at her parents' house, but I knew she wasn't there. I stood in the living room for a moment, unsure of what to do next. The thought of her, out there with him, made my stomach turn. The anger had simmered beneath the surface for weeks now, but seeing the truth, I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I went to my office and checked the footage from the studio, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but I couldn't stop myself from pressing play. And there it was, Carol and her boy toy, engaged in sex. The drive to Jeff's house felt like the longest one yet. My phone buzzed a few times with calls from Carol, but I didn't answer any of them. I saw a text pop up from her. "Pick me up from my studio." I ignored it, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel as I thought about everything. When I arrived, Brenda greeted me at the door with a smile, but there was an underlying tension that I couldn't ignore. I walked in and took a seat next to Jeff, who had a drink in his hand. His warm smile greeted me, but I couldn't fully relax. My mind kept drifting back to Carol and the betrayal I was still processing. Then, to my surprise, Carol walked in. And with her, of course, was Brian. The moment she saw me sitting there, her face faltered for just a second. She looked unsettled. "I was waiting for you to pick me up from the studio," she said, her voice sharp. "Why didn't you answer my calls?" I waited and waited, and then Brian dropped me here. I didn't even look at her. I just turned to Jeff and resumed talking as though I hadn't heard a thing. Her frustration was growing. "David, I'm talking to you," she snapped. I ignored her again, But this time, I glanced over at Brenda. She was sitting there, blissfully unaware of the tension thick in the room. "Dear mother-in-law," I said, my tone cool. "Why did you allow her to go to the studio? Don't you see? Carol had such a tough time waiting." Brenda blinked, clearly confused by my words. "Let her go? What do you mean?" she asked, a silly look on her face. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood up, my body rigid. I pulled out my phone and showed her the message Carol had sent me earlier. "Look at this," I said, showing the screen to Brenda. "I'll be at my parents' house tonight. Don't wait up." Brenda's eyes went wide as she read it. She looked at me, then back at Carol, then at Brian. A mixture of confusion and realization dawning on her. I stared at Brenda for a moment, processing her words. She seemed genuinely confused, like she couldn't grasp what was unfolding right in front of her. "Oh, was she not here last night? But Carol?" I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. Carol gave me that smile, the one she thought was charming but I knew better. "Yeah, I was here." "Yes, Mom," she said, her words dripping with false sweetness. I looked back at Brenda, who gave a confused nod, still oblivious to the reality I was laying out. I turned to Jeff, keeping my tone sharp. "You must have missed her in the house," I said, sarcasm thick in my voice. Jeff knew exactly what I meant. He didn't say anything, but the weight of my words hung in the air. I couldn't let this moment pass. I shifted my attention to Brian, who was standing there with his awkward posture, clearly out of place. "Who is this man, and why do I have a feeling he's going to get his legs broken soon?" I asked, my eyes narrowing as I walked toward him. Before I could get too close, Carol stepped in between us, her voice trembling with a mix of panic and defiance. "No, don't you dare go near him. He's a friend," she snapped. I looked Brian up and down, taking in every detail. "Isn't he a bit younger for you?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Carol shot back instantly, her voice rising in frustration. "Shut up, David. You don't know what you're talking about." I could see the anger simmering in her eyes, but I wasn't backing down now. Suddenly, Brenda screamed, her voice high-pitched and full of indignation. "David, I've had enough. Are you accusing my daughter of cheating on you?" I turned to Brenda, my voice steady but filled with a cold intensity. "No, I'm not accusing. I'm going to prove it." The words hung in the air, making sure she understood the gravity of the situation. I turned to Carol, locking eyes with her. "Where were you yesterday evening?" I asked, my voice now sharper, demanding the truth. She looked at Brenda, her face trying to hold onto some semblance of innocence. "I was here," Carol said, her words shaky but firm. Brenda, almost too quick to defend her, nodded. "Yes, she was here," she confirmed, her voice sounding defensive. I turned back to Brenda, my patience wearing thin. "Dear mother-in-law," I said, my tone deliberately measured. "I used to love you like my own mother, but now, you've just turned that love into hate." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. I shot another glance at Carol, my eyes narrowing. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Carol," I said, the warning clear in my voice. "Where were you? Because after that, do not blame me for the hell I'm about to unleash." The room had grown tense, and a few more relatives had filtered in, sensing the rising storm. I turned to face them, my voice cutting through the chatter as I spoke with ice in my veins. "Oh, welcome. The show is about to get hot." I didn't care who heard at this point. They needed to know what was happening. I turned back to Carol, my gaze hard. "Now, Carol, one last time. Where the hell were you last night?" I'm standing there, watching as the tension in the room keeps building. Brenda's face is red with anger, but she's also trying to hold her ground. Carol, on the other hand, looks panicked, shifting uncomfortably as I pull my phone out and connect it to the TV. The screen flickers to life, showing a scene that makes everyone pause. There's Carol on a stretcher, being wheeled into the hospital, her face pale and eyes wide in pain. I turn to Brenda, unable to contain my voice. "Well, Brenda, you never told me you had two identical daughters." I zoom in, and there's Carol's face, unmistakable. Brenda's eyes narrow, but she's caught off guard. "What are you doing? What is this?" Carol stammers, her voice shaking. "I fell down and injured myself." I let the silence hang between us for a moment before turning to face Brenda directly. "Then why didn't you call your husband to tell him? Why did you hide the truth from him?" She's fumbling for an answer, her lips trembling. "I didn't want you to be concerned." I can't help but smirk, my voice cutting through the air. "Or did you take your husband with you to the hospital?" The words left my mouth before I could even think about them. I pull up another video, this time from the studio, and pressed play. The room goes dead silent as the image on the screen fills up the TV. It clearly showed Brian was doing Carol, and suddenly she started screaming and they rushed to the hospital. I heard gasps and murmurs filling the room. Everyone was in shock, faces frozen in disbelief. It was clear that there's no turning back now. Now, Carol, I'm leaving. Do not bother coming home. I will file for a divorce. Her face goes pale as the words sink in. She opens her mouth to protest, but I cut her off before she can speak. And it will be under adultery, I add coldly, my eyes never leaving hers. I can see her eyes welling up, but I did not let that bother me. I turn to Brenda, whose gaze is frantic now. She stands there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. I will file for divorce, Brenda, I say, locking eyes with her, and it will be under adultery. I will see to it that Carol leaves the marriage as she came in, empty-handed. Brenda's mouth dropped open, and she started shouting, "Hell no, David. She was your wife. You can't just abandon her like that. She has your baby." I took a deep breath and said, "She needs to prove that it's my baby. If it's mine, I'll take care of it. Otherwise, not my baby, not my problem." Then I walked out. The next morning, I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me, but the call from Brenda caught me off guard. "David," she said, her voice strained. "We're coming over to pick up Carol's clothes." I didn't respond at first. I didn't even know if I wanted to deal with them, but I couldn't avoid this any longer. "Fine," I muttered, feeling the anger bubble up again. A few minutes later, they showed up. I watched them walk through the door. They went straight to the bedroom, and I stayed downstairs. As I was sitting there, trying to breathe through the frustration, I heard a noise upstairs. The unmistakable sound of rustling fabric, things being moved around. It was Carol. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard her footsteps, and when she walked down the stairs, I saw a faint smile on her face. She looked like she was up to something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't until a few minutes later when I walked into the bedroom that I realized what had happened. My wallet was on the floor, discarded like it didn't matter. My heart sank, and I quickly realized what had gone down. Carol had taken all my cards. I picked up the wallet, trying to stay calm, and immediately called the bank to cancel all my cards. I couldn't let her run up any more charges, and I needed to stop the bleeding before it got worse. Without a second thought, I picked up the phone again and called my father-in-law. "Jeff," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Carol took my wallet. You need to cancel your card. Now." There was silence on the other end before he responded, sounding shaken. "What? Are you serious?" "Yeah," I replied, my stomach tightening. "She took it. She's probably already used it by now. Just cancel it." I didn't think much of it after that, just assuming that we'd be able to sort everything out in time. But then, a few hours later, I heard the news that would change everything. Brenda called me back, her voice frantic. "David, I need you to listen. Jeff, he had a stroke." I rushed him to the hospital. I froze. "What? A stroke? How? What happened?" "His condition is bad," she said, her voice trembling with panic. "He's been having issues with his lungs, and now, his heart. The cancer has also flared up. He's not doing well, David." I felt a surge of guilt hit me, but she wasn't done. "David," she continued, "Jeff told me about the card, about how Carol stole it. And now she's spent over $200,000. And we can't afford to pay for his treatment." I stood there, looking at Brenda, and I could see the look on her face. Guilt, sorrow, maybe even regret. She had no words left to say, only a look that conveyed everything. "Have you called Carol?" I asked, my tone flat. She sighed, shaking her head. "I did," she said, her voice weak, "but she's not answering." I felt a mix of anger and frustration rising in me. It was all so messed up. Carol's betrayal, the money she'd stolen, everything that had happened. I needed to get through to her somehow. The next day, the truth hit like a wrecking ball. I found out that Carol was living with Brian, her boy toy. That piece of information pushed me to the edge. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed her number. When she picked up, I didn't waste any time. "Carol," I started, my voice low and controlled. "You need to return the money you stole." There was a moment of silence, followed by a harsh laugh on the other end of the line. "I deserve that money," she said, her tone arrogant. "I'm not giving it back. I've done nothing wrong." I clenched my jaw, barely keeping my cool. "It was your father's money," I reminded her, my voice firm. "You can't just take what doesn't belong to you." She didn't even flinch. "You're lying, David," she spat. "You just want to make me look bad, but I'm not falling for it." I felt my blood boil as the conversation dragged on, but before I could say anything else, Brenda took the phone. I listened in on her side of the call. "Carol," she said, her voice trembling with frustration and desperation, "you need to come to the hospital. Your father is in critical condition. Please, he needs you." Carol didn't take it well. "I'm not coming," she snapped. "And stop trying to guilt-trip me. You and David are just trying to turn everything on me." The line went dead after that. A few hours later, though, Brenda came to me, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and disbelief. "She's here," she said, almost whispering. Carol finally showed up. I didn't expect her to take it seriously, but when I heard she'd finally made her way to the hospital, I thought maybe there was hope for some kind of reconciliation. But when Carol walked in, her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of Jeff's condition. She was visibly shaken, but only for a moment. And then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she turned and rushed out of the hospital, leaving us behind. Where was she going? It didn't take long for me to find out. She went straight to Brian. Carol hadn't spent the money after all. She'd just withdrawn it and kept it with Brian. When I found out, I wasn't surprised, but hearing it from her just made everything feel so much worse. The situation with Brian went exactly as I'd expected. Carol had argued with him, tried to get him to give the money back, but he just flat out refused. "I never got any money from you," Brian had said, his tone as cold as ice. Carol was desperate, her voice growing louder with each word, but Brian stood his ground. Their argument dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, Carol gave up, storming out of his place, and went straight back to the hospital. When she finally walked through the door, she looked defeated, almost broken. "David," she said, her voice flat, "I took the money out and kept it with Brian, but now he refuses to give it back." Brenda, who had been sitting silently up until then, was in shock. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, her whole body sagging with the weight of it all. She turned to me, her voice quiet but full of desperation. "David, is there anything you can do?" I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. "I'll try my best," I said, my mind already racing. I had to do something. I immediately left the room, heading toward the hospital management to see what I could arrange. But as I was walking down the hallway, my phone rang. It was Brenda. Her voice, when it came through the line, was empty. No emotion, just flat. "David," she said, the words hitting me like a punch. "Leave it. Jeff is gone. He left us." My heart stopped. I could barely process it as the truth sank in. I didn't even respond at first. I just ran. I rushed back to the room, my feet pounding against the hospital floor. When I burst through the door, I saw Brenda standing near the window, her back turned to the room, her shoulders shaking slightly as if she was holding herself together by the thinnest thread. Carol was sitting beside Jeff, her face buried in her hands, crying. And in that moment, I realized this was the second time I had lost a father figure. There was nothing more I could do to save Jeff. He had fought so hard, trying to do everything right, saving that money for his treatment, but in the end, he was killed by the stupidity of his own daughter. It hit me harder than I cared to admit. I had lost him, and Carol's actions, her greed, her selfishness, were the cause of it all. After the funeral, Brenda called me. Her voice was heavy with regret as she apologized for ever voicing support for Carol. She told me that she had cut ties with her daughter and had legally disowned her. "I've made a will," Brenda said quietly. "I've put you as the nominee for my assets." I took a deep breath, swallowing the bitter taste in my throat. "Thank you, Brenda," I replied, my voice steady. "I forgive you, but I'll never forgive Carol. Not for what she did. Not for Jeff." She paused on the other end of the line, her tone softening. "Neither will I." That was all we said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a slight weight lift off my shoulders. 3 days later, I had Carol served. I walked into her studio, where she was working on some new project or another, and handed her the legal papers. The notice was clear. She was to vacate the studio immediately as it was under my name, and I was the one paying off the loan. She didn't say a word at first, but I could see the look in her eyes, a mixture of shock and anger. "You can't do this," she hissed, standing up abruptly. "This is my place." I didn't flinch. "You no longer have a choice, Carol. You're out." The divorce was nothing short of a nightmare. Carol fought me every step of the way, dragging out the process, making it as difficult as possible. But the truth was clear. I wasn't the father of her child, and I wasn't about to let her manipulate the situation any longer. I had the DNA test results with me, and I knew I was not the father, but it would not be admissible in the court. So, I had to wait for the court to order it. It all came to a head when the judge, who happened to be a close friend of Jeff's, made it clear that Carol had no choice but to submit to a paternity test. She initially tried to refuse, throwing tantrums and accusing me of trying to ruin her life. But the judge wasn't about to entertain her games. I remember the day Carol finally caved. She called me, her voice laced with frustration and a hint of desperation. "Fine, David," she spat. "I'll do the damn test. But this isn't over. You'll regret this." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I had been patient with her for far too long, and now it was time for the truth to come out. The test results came back after what felt like an eternity. The moment I walked into the lawyer's office and saw the envelope on the table, I knew it was over. The judge's face said everything. He didn't even need to say the words. "I knew you were lying," I said to Carol when we sat down, my voice steady but cold. "I'm not the father, Carol. It's over." Her face turned red, her eyes welling up with rage. "You think this is it?" she hissed. "You really think I'm just going to walk away like this? You'll pay for this, David. You'll regret this whole damn thing." But there was no turning back now. The truth was out. The courtroom was tense that day. Carol sat across from me. The judge was prepared to announce the verdict on the child support and alimony case. "Miss Carol," the judge began, his voice carrying authority, "after reviewing all evidence presented in this case, the court has determined that Mr. David is not the biological father of your child. As such, he is not obligated to provide any child support to you, nor will he be held responsible for any expenses related to the child's upbringing." Carol's face reddened. I could see the anger bubbling beneath her surface, but there was nothing she could do. The law had spoken. However, the judge continued, "The court has considered your request for alimony and has determined that you are eligible to receive alimony payments of $1,000 per month for the next 3 years. This is to assist with your transition, given the circumstances surrounding your marriage and separation from Mr. David." Carol's eyes widened at the mention of alimony. It wasn't a large sum by any means, but it was something she could cling to in the wake of everything she had lost. But the judge wasn't finished. "I encourage you to use this time to focus on stability and responsibility for yourself and your child. The court will not entertain any further claims regarding child support from Mr. David," the judge said firmly, closing the matter. Carol didn't respond immediately, but her eyes narrowed as she stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "You think this is over?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "I'll make sure you regret this. You'll see. You'll all see." As I left the courtroom, I could hear Carol behind me, muttering under her breath, likely planning her next move. And sure enough, it didn't take long for her to file a new court case, this time against Brian, the real father of her child. Brian was summoned to court after Carol filed for child support, demanding that he take responsibility for the child. Brian had been avoiding the issue, probably hoping it would just disappear, but the court wasn't having it. The judge addressed Brian with the same stern tone he had used with Carol. "Mr. Brian," the judge began, "you are being asked to take a paternity test. We've already seen the results from the previous case, and it's clear that Mr. David is not the father. You are the biological father, and as such, you are obligated to provide child support for the child in question." Brian's face went pale. He hadn't expected this turn of events, and I could see the nervousness creeping into his expression. I didn't know. I wasn't sure," Brian stammered, clearly caught off guard by the sudden responsibility being thrust upon him. The judge raised an eyebrow. "I understand that this may be difficult, Mr. Brian, but the law is clear. You will be required to take a paternity test to confirm your responsibility. Failure to comply will lead to further legal consequences." And just like that, the judge made it clear, Brian had no choice but to take the test. The courtroom was tense as Brian reluctantly agreed to submit. A few days later, the results were in, and the truth was undeniable. Brian was the father. The court informed Carol of the paternity test results, and her face fell as she finally had to accept the consequences of her actions. "Mr. Brian," the judge said, his voice steady, "you are confirmed as the biological father. The court will proceed to determine your child support obligations, as well as any other financial responsibilities you have toward the child." Brian stood up. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "I guess I have no choice, huh?" he muttered, his voice resigned. "No choice at all," the judge replied. "But let this serve as a reminder that we all have responsibilities, whether we want them or not." Carol looked at Brian with a mixture of contempt and bitterness, but deep down, she knew that he was now her only hope. I heard about the fire at Brian's house one morning. The details were sparse at first, but the rumors were enough. People were saying it was some kind of accident, an electrical issue, or maybe something else, but I knew better. I knew that life wasn't going to let Brian off that easy. A few days after the fire, news came in about Brian getting beat up. It was brutal. A group of young men had attacked him, trying to rob him, and ended up leaving him for dead. The news report showed a blurry image of him sitting on the curb, bloodied, with his face swollen beyond recognition. He was crying, his hands clutching his chest. It wasn't hard to put two and two together. Brian had always been a wreck, always trying to outrun his problems, and now they had caught up with him in the worst way possible. I couldn't say I felt sorry for him, not after everything, but still, the image of him lying there, helpless, twisted something inside me. The universe had its own way of balancing things out. The hospital reports were grim. He had multiple broken bones, bruises all over his body, and a ruptured testicle. His life had become a series of misfortunes, a broken path of decisions that had all led him here. The insurance would cover his medical bills, but the damage was far more than just financial. He would never walk straight again. I couldn't shake the feeling that Brian's fate was somehow tied to Carol's, that both of them were living out the consequences of their actions. Carol might have gotten her alimony from me, but she still had to deal with the child support from Brian, and she was going to get it all. She had no choice. The court had granted her what she wanted, and now she had to face the reality of her decisions. But that was it for her too. She had what she wanted, money, child support, but it didn't seem to be enough. She had burned every bridge, every relationship she had once had. Even her own mother had cut ties with her. I don't think Carol even cared anymore. The money and the child support would keep her going for a while, but deep down, I knew that was the end of the line for her. There was no more pretending, no more games. Life had run its course, and Carol had become just another casualty of her own decisions. A few days later, I met Brenda. It had been a quiet period, and for once, things felt like they were finally settling down. We had a quiet dinner, and after a few moments of silence, she looked at me, her eyes darker than usual. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "David," she began, her tone serious, "there's something I need to confess." I raised an eyebrow, curious, but not entirely surprised. Over the years, Brenda had been full of secrets, some big, some small, but this felt different. She continued, and what she said next made my stomach drop. "The fire at Brian's house, and the beating he took, that was me. I made sure of it," she said, almost coldly, as if it was a fact, something she had to do. "What do you mean, you made sure of it?" I asked, my voice tight. Brenda sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I couldn't just let him get away with everything he did. Not after everything that happened to Jeff. I wanted him to suffer, to remember what he took from us, from Jeff, for the rest of his life." I was silent for a long time, processing what she had said. Part of me understood, in a twisted way. Brian had caused so much pain, and his actions had led to Jeff's death. But still, hearing it from Brenda's lips, knowing that she had orchestrated something so cruel, it sent a shiver down my spine. "I never thought you had it in you," I muttered, a bit more to myself than to her. She smiled faintly, as if amused by my reaction. "I guess I'm full of surprises," she replied. "But you should know, David, I would do anything to protect what's mine, and that includes my family." I didn't know how to respond. I had always respected Brenda for her strength, but now, hearing her words, I realized just how far she was willing to go to exact her own brand of justice. Deep down, I made a mental note: do not get on the wrong side of this lady. A few years later, life took a different turn for me. I met Margaret, a kind, patient woman who helped me rebuild the pieces of my life I didn't even know I'd lost. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges, but we made it work, and in the end, I was glad we had found each other. We got married in a small ceremony, and soon after, we were blessed with a son named Timothy. As I watched Margaret with Timothy, I couldn't help but smile. I had come a long way from the darkness of my past, and with Margaret by my side, everything felt right. Brenda, of course, became Timothy's grandmother. There was no one left on my side of the family, but I never felt like that mattered. What mattered was the family we had built. And so, as I held Timothy in my arms, I couldn't help but think, life is good. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.